Good morning. The UK is ramping up its diplomatic efforts over Ukraine this morning as Russia continues to mass its troops on its neighbour's border. It's also putting 1,000 British troops on standby in case of a humanitarian crisis in Eastern Europe, should the Russian military build-up escalate. Boris Johnson is in Brussels this morning to meet the NATO Secretary-General before heading to Poland later on. He's issued a warning to Russia that NATO member states will draw lines in the snow over the Ukraine crisis. Meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is due to meet the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Moscow today. She's expected to urge the Kremlin to cease its aggression over Ukraine in what is the first visit to Moscow by a UK Foreign Secretary in more than 4 years. In a moment, we'll get the latest from Moscow with Diana Magnay. But first, let's take you to Brussels. Ali standing by for us this morning. Hi, Ali. Talk us through what's planned today.
Morning, Kay. Yeah, that's right. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, will effectively be reiterating his support for NATO, saying that Britain won't flinch. He'll be meeting the Secretary-General, Jens Stoltenberg, here in the next couple of hours. Worth saying, too, that Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, will also be here, trying to show that Labour, too, can be tough on security and defence. But Boris Johnson will be in Brussels, and then he will also be going to Poland today to meet the Polish president. Britain, of course, have sent 350 extra troops to Poland over the last couple of days, and the Prime Minister today announcing too that 1,000 more British troops are going to be made available to NATO in the event of a humanitarian crisis if Russia does decide to invade Ukraine. Of course, Russia say that is not their intention. They say that they are protecting their own security. Both sides say they want diplomacy to work. As you say, Kay, we've seen a significant stepping up in the diplomatic efforts the last few days. We've seen President Macron in Moscow. We've seen the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in the US. Today, Liz Truss is in Moscow meeting her Russian counterpart, and tomorrow the British Defence Secretary is going to be in Moscow. So a significant stepping up in the diplomacy, but troops are moving. And on that fundamental point of tension around the expansion of NATO, it's hard to see the gap where there can be an agreement. Both sides are standing firm in a real sense that the next couple of days could really be decisive, Kay.
Meantime, Diana, what's the mood in Moscow?
Well, I think these are going to be very hard talks. Liz Truss will lay down the law. She's already made clear that she will call on Russia to stop its aggression against Ukraine, to de-escalate. The question is what happens then, because if you encourage and order Russia to stay on the diplomatic path, there has to be some reason for Russia to decide to stay on it. It knows that the UK has a large sanctions package ready to go. Bear in mind that UK-Russian relations are in a very dire state. Boris Johnson came here as Foreign Secretary 4 years ago. Then the Salisbury poisonings happened. So relations have only deteriorated, and now we have the possibility of war on Europe once again. So it will be a tricky conversation. It's a relatively short conversation, but I think what Boris Johnson said today is really the nub of it. He said there has to be real diplomacy, not coercive diplomacy. Now, Russia seems to be using coercive diplomacy to try, on the face of it, to secure legally binding security guarantees, and it will need a creative solution if the West and Russia are to try and broach this impasse. And we'll see whether in the next few days the UK manages to make any headway at all on that.
OK. Ladies, for now, thanks very much indeed. Of course, we'll cover that throughout the course of the day here on Sky News for you. Let's look ahead now in a bit more detail to the Prime Minister's meeting with that NATO Secretary-General, Jens Stoltenberg. Fabrice Pothier is a former head of policy planning at NATO and is joining us now. Hello to you. Thank you for joining us on the programme. How do these sort of talks go? What happens?
Well, I was not in the room, but what I can tell you is that it's pretty obvious the UK is playing a front role in this crisis. And I think Johnson has managed to score some significant points in showing that the United Kingdom remains a European power, not only because of this meeting with the NATO Secretary General, but because of the fairly close relationship with leaders in Poland, but also the UK's commitment to Ukraine. However, the real question mark is whether Johnson and the UK can be part of the solution. And this is more complicated because as your correspondent said, the UK and Russia have a pretty bad relationship. And it's very unlikely that Johnson will be sitting on the other side of a long table with President Putin on the other side.
The Ukrainian ambassador to the UK was here on the programme yesterday morning, in fact, and he was saying that he feels that the likelihood of war has diminished. What's your take?
I think it's very psychological. Depending on who you talk to, that likelihood is different. What is clear is that President Putin is maintaining the pressure. There has not been a substantial withdrawal of the forces that have been massed across the Russian-Ukrainian border. The exercise in Belarus is going ahead. So far, I think you don't see sign of de-escalation from the Russian side, but rather of maintaining the pressure. And that pressure, even when the exercise in Belarus will be over, I think Putin has all the reasons to keep the pressure because he's getting face time and he's getting, in a way, concessions from the West and NATO. So why should he stop?
OK, and as far as President Putin is concerned, though, I mean, he does have to worry, doesn't he, about the threat of sanctions, which will harm the Russian people.
Yes, but the fundamental weakness in our sanctions kind of signaling is that we have signaled sanctions only if and when Putin will go on a significant aggression against Ukraine, whilst actually the Ukrainian leaders were arguing for sanctions before, for kind of preemptive sanctions already now, to signal that there is already a cost in doing this kind of escalation. So yes, I think the sanctions are compelling, but Putin, as long as he stays on the other side of that line in the snow, will not face any cost.
Ukraine wants to join NATO. Good idea?
I think Ukraine is entitled to want to join an alliance. It's a sovereign nation. It's a democratic one. I think this is totally their right. But obviously, this is a decision that has to be made between Ukraine and the 30 NATO members. And in a politically realistic way, it's highly unlikely, given the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. And this is what Putin has achieved. He has basically de facto built for himself a veto card on Ukraine's membership to NATO. The same with Georgia. And this is very painful to see because Ukraine is strategically very important and is basically on the front line of our kind of defense vis-a-vis, Western Europe or broader Europe and Russia.
Finally, I told you what we heard from the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK yesterday. What's your view? Do you think we are a little bit further away from a potential invasion?
We are probably further away from immediate aggression, but we are not further away from, we are not closer, from a solution. Because what Putin wants is something we, as NATO, but also the Ukrainians, cannot and will not give, which is basically he wants to have a debilitating say on Ukraine. He wants to own, or at least part own Ukraine. And since 2014, the Ukrainian people have said they're not interested in that.
OK, it's good to talk to you. Thanks for your perspective. Much
much
appreciated. Thank you. Just a reminder, 9 o'clock, speaking to the Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, who will be answering your questions. And we've had so many of them. Really interesting set of questions, both in vision from some of you and also via Twitter and Instagram and email using all sorts of social media. That to come from 9 o'clock. Meantime, a look at this morning's front pages for you. The Guardian's headline, COVID rules to be abolished in England in a fortnight. The Mail says England is leading the world in ending coronavirus restrictions. The Sun focuses on West Ham footballer Kurt Zouma's cats being rescued by the RSPCA after online footage showed him mistreating them. According to the Telegraph, at least 50 people are expected to contact, or to be contacted, I should say, in the next few days by the Metropolitan Police, investigating parties in Downing Street during lockdown. Times also leads on the Met's investigation. There you go. Staying with that, Tamara has more for us. So 50 people going to be sent questionnaires. Does that include the Prime Minister?
50 people being questioned. We assume it does because they are people who attended those parties, and we know that he attended several of those which are under investigation. This questioning takes the form of a questionnaire, but it is a legally binding one. And after receiving it, which will be some point this week, they will then have 7 days to return it. So it looks like this police investigation is progressing. And another development yesterday, there was a new picture in the Daily Mirror of this Zoom quiz that we knew about from December. We saw the Prime Minister with a couple of other staff members, one of them with tinsel around his neck.
But we saw pictures before.
We've seen this before, but this is a different angle where we've got the open drink bottle and one additional person behind the laptop who we didn't know about before. So that's 3 people. So there are now calls for the police to look into that, and they say they're going to ask some questions about it. So Boris Johnson on the world stage today, pledging troops to NATO. But, of course, he knows that this is coming down the track, and if he ends up getting a fixed penalty fine, then he's going to have a very difficult time with Tory MPs.
And did I pay for that bottle of champagne and those crisps?
That is a question that the police may establish the answer to.
Yeah, I mean, is it taxpayers' money or...?
I assume a lot of what is brought into Downing Street is taxpayers' money. But yes, this party, which was initially not being investigated because the people doing the quiz were in a different room, so it was considered that what the Prime Minister was doing wasn't a party. And in fact, members of the Cabinet said, oh, it wasn't as if they were drinking or anything. This picture seems to put a different spin on it. But Dominic Cummings, who, as we know, is now gunning for the Prime Minister, says that there are better pictures around, including of parties in the Prime Minister's flat. So we'll see if anything comes of that.
Well, there we go. Thanks very much. Thanks a lot. The news came just hours after a fresh photo emerged, there you go, of that Christmas quiz in number 10, Scotland Yard, revealing officers who are looking into what happened at number 10. They will be, as Tamara was saying, looking into that in more detail. Meantime, we're going to be speaking to a pig farmer calling for more government support as the industry crisis goes on. Is it the end of the pandemic as we know it? At 7:45, I'll be talking through the Prime Minister's plans to lift all COVID restrictions in a fortnight. And as I said, don't forget, at 9 o'clock, joined in the studio by the Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, who will be answering all of your questions. She's one of the biggest stars of the Winter Olympics so far. 15-year-old Russian figure skater Kamila Valieva's performance on the ice in Beijing has been hailed as one of the greatest ever. But the ceremony to present her and her teammates the gold medal for the figure skating team event has been delayed for unexplained legal reasons. And there are unconfirmed reports in the Russian media that she has failed a test for a banned substance. Let's bring in our sports correspondent, Tom, who's standing by for us. She's a young girl, so I'm guessing they're treading carefully.
They are. This is a big deal for 2 main reasons, Kay, and that is that, as you say, she is a teenage prodigy at these games, the first woman to pull off a quadruple jump in Olympic competition. She is a sensational skater, but as you say, the first sign that something was wrong was when the medal ceremony for her and the Russian team was delayed for unknown reasons. They won the gold medal in the team competition. She's due to compete in the individual competition later. And her age at 15 is one of the reasons why I think all of the officials are treading so carefully. They're very limited in what they can say about what's going on. This is what happened in a news conference in Beijing when reporters tried to ask the Olympic organisers what was happening.
It was the doping case involving Kamila Valieva. What kind of information do you have? Can you confirm those reports?
As you can imagine, I'm not going to comment on all sorts of speculation that I have also seen overnight, and that speculation will continue. As I said, as you said, we had a situation arrive yesterday at short notice, has legal implications, and I'm not, and I hope you would appreciate, I'm not from the podium of a press conference going to comment on a legal case because it wouldn't be appropriate.
Now, the second reason this is such a big deal is because she, of course, competes under the Russian Olympic Committee flag. And that is, of course, you may remember that back in 2014 in Sochi, in Russia, there was a state-sponsored doping program that was exposed to the uproar of the international sporting community. And it is a big if at this stage, if it is found that that has happened again to any degree within Olympic competition, it will all kick off and there will be major arguments and recriminations. But at this stage, nothing has been proven, and the Kremlin spokesperson has said we simply need to wait for clarity as to what is going on, and that seems a pretty sensible position at this point.
OK, thanks, Tom. Thanks a lot. Meantime, the fallout from the pictures of a Premier League player kicking his cat, one of his two cats, continues with both the player and his club losing sponsorship deals. West Ham defender Kurt Zouma faced a storm of criticism over the video that was posted, I should say, by his brother at the weekend. Milena is at West Ham's training ground in East London. He was played, actually, wasn't he, the night before last? And we had the mayor in the studio. He wasn't happy about that at all. What's happening now, Milena? Good morning.
Good morning, Kay. The mayor was not the only one who was pretty much outraged by the fact that Kurt Zouma took part in that game on Tuesday. Now, the burning question is whether the manager, David Moyes, will include Zouma in his upcoming game against Leicester City on Sunday. Now, there was a sense that even though the club condemned his behaviour via statement, so in words, their actions by including him in the game made people question how seriously they really took it. Since then, they've, of course, fined the player 2 weeks' wages, which is about £250,000. But nonetheless, this backlash has continued. Take a listen to what Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, said yesterday about it.
It's despicable. I think a number of things need to happen urgently. I think the RSPCA and the police need to work together to prosecute this player. I'm disappointed in David Moyes and West Ham, actually. I know how important 3 points are. I support a club as well, but I think they should have shown leadership and dropped him last night. And I worry when young people see Premier League footballers getting away with bad behaviour, or prime ministers or anybody else, it thinks it's OK and you can be successful. That's why it's really important for leaders and role models, and whether you're a footballer or the mayor or, you know, journalists, we're role models and we should lead by example.
And what we really heard the club is sponsors peeling away. So Vitality, their official wellness partner, said they were suspending their relationship. Adidas also dropped Kurt Zouma from their athlete roster. And of course, the RSPCA has taken in his two pet cats for examination. Essex Police, alongside the animal welfare organisation, are conducting inquiries, and there's an online petition calling for Zouma to be prosecuted that has reached more than 225,000 signatures.
OK, thanks very much, Milena. Thank you. Yeah, I know that you've got very strong views on that. So many of you messaged me over the last 24 hours or so. The cats are now in a place of safety. They are being examined. Let's see what happens next. Looking at today's other headlines for you. And world tennis number one, Novak Djokovic, has been included on the entry list for next month's Indian Wells tournament in California. Organisers say valid proof of full vaccination will be required for entry to the competition venue. The 20-time Grand Slam champion was unable to play in last month's Australian Open after being deported over his COVID vaccination status. In other words, he's not vaccinated. A bipartisan group of US senators has agreed a deal to renew the Violence Against Women Act, bolstering domestic protections for women in abusive relationships. It followed an emotional plea from the actor Angelina Jolie, who said that the neglection of domestic violence legislation in Washington made victims feel worthless.
Most of all, I want to acknowledge the children who are terrified and suffering at this moment, and the many people for whom this legislation comes too late. The women who have suffered through this system with little or no support, who still carry the pain and trauma of their abuse, the young adults who have survived abuse and emerged stronger.
NASA has raised concerns about Elon Musk's plan to deploy 30,000 satellites into space, fearing they could crash into other objects orbiting the Earth. The US Space Agency has warned about the possible impact on future space missions. The UK's first 100-mile-an-hour hybrid train will start transporting passengers today. The hybrid Flex was developed by adding a powerful battery to a diesel engine. It could reduce its carbon emissions by 25%. The train will initially run from London to Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire. And if you scan the QR code on your screen right now, you can listen to today's edition of the Sky News Daily podcast. Pig farmers will hold talks with the government later over the continuing crisis in the industry. Yep, it's still going on. We spoke previously to Vicky Scott. She's a pig farmer, and she is joining us now. Hello to you, Vicky. Thanks for joining us on the programme. So what's going to happen today?
OK, so the NPA, the National Pig Association, have arranged a roundtable meeting with DEFRA, the processors and the retailers that's happening this afternoon in London.
OK.
Hopefully.
What is the situation at the moment? Where do you find ourselves? I remember previously talking about pigs having to be culled because there weren't enough butchers available.
Yeah, that's still happening. Probably we're worse than ever, to be honest. There's an estimated extra 200,000 pigs on farms right now. At least 35,000 have been killed for absolutely no reason. We've lost 10% of our producers. They've gone out of business. It's desperate, and the government really, really needs to step in now and address this problem and do something about it.
Yeah, that pig doesn't like the sound of that, does he? How is it affecting your farm and your livelihood?
It's extremely stressful. We've got pigs backed up. We've got about 2,500 extra pigs on farms. It's costing us an absolute fortune. And it's just not a good situation to be in. You know, it's not good for anybody. It's not good for the pigs. It's not good for the humans, and something has to change.
Yeah, I mean, pigs are intelligent animals, aren't they? I'm guessing it causes them unnecessary stress as well.
Well, we're doing our very best to minimise the stress for the pigs. I'll try and turn my camera around in a minute, but we've got about 600 piglets staying on my breeding unit at the moment that should have gone on to third-party yards. They're looking fairly happy. So we're doing the best we can to minimise the stress for the pigs. But financially, it's crippling for farmers. And it's just not right that we're being forced into a situation where we have to kill healthy pigs on farms.
How could this have been avoided?
That's a very interesting question, and hopefully one that we're going to get an answer to and make sure it doesn't happen again. Basically, the whole situation has arisen due to a lack of butchers in the processing plants. And despite the fact that government relaxed the rules in October and said we could bring in more butchers into the processing plants and actually opened up private storage, nothing has changed. So we're asking government today to, again, relax the rules and allow skilled butchers in more easily. But we need more transparency within the supply chain. At the moment, the supply chain is very one-sided towards the processors and the retailers, and the farmers are taking the hit. Financially and emotionally, and the government really needs to step in and address this, because before long there will not be any independent pig producers left, and that's not a situation that anyone in the country wants to see.
OK. I wonder if we might be able to see your piglets before we go.
Yeah, on a minute.
Exciting.
You could if I could work my camera. Here we
OK,
go.
you just need to press a thing where it says it flips it round. Got it? Look at them. How old are they?
They don't look too stressed, do they? They're having a great time.
They look very, very happy indeed. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
No problem. Thank you.
Take care. Good luck today. Thank you. 4 legs good. Now, a Ford Motors factory has been forced to close after truckers protesting against a vaccine mandate blocked Canada's busiest land crossing with the United States. Pressure is building on the Canadian Prime Minister over COVID restrictions amid warnings the demonstrations could have widespread implications. Here's Martha Kellner.
This road would usually be humming with the engines of thousands of lorries. Now only the screech of resistance.
What do we want? Freedom! When do we want it?
Some here oppose vaccine mandates, others oppose masks. Some oppose their government entirely. Together, they've brought this border crossing to a complete standstill. the busiest land link between the USA and Canada, now a hockey pitch.
Right now, we're hitting the elites right where it hurts, and this will stop it.
You think they're listening? You think Justin Trudeau's listening?
They have no choice but to listen. They're losing money, and that's what elites don't like, is losing money.
I have 5 children, and when they misbehave, I put them on timeout to change things. And I think this is timeout for the government.
Do you feel sorry for people who this has affected?
Yeah, in a way I do, but at the same time, I think the time that we're spending out here is very little compared to the time that we've all been cooped up in our homes.
This is an absolutely vital trade route between the USA and Canada, and it's now been shut for 3 days. Fears growing, understandably, for the supply chains of the businesses who rely on this route. People's jobs, people's livelihoods and businesses in peril. This area on both sides of the border relies on just-in-time deliveries for car factories. If this bridge remains empty much longer, they may grind to a halt. And the authorities are at a loss for how to deal with the demonstrators.
The problem that you see is they're hardened in their position, but many there have also expressed that this is a cause that they're willing to die for. And so that elevates the psyche on the ground to a whole different level where police need a different type of response because we don't want anyone to get hurt.
Copycat blockades have sprung up at other cities and border crossings. The economic impact is untold. Even if their message is confused, these protesters know that this has made them impossible to ignore. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Ontario, Canada.
Looks pretty chilly there, doesn't it? Certainly as far as the weather is concerned. Let's find out what it's doing here.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Southern parts mostly fine today, while the windy north and west will see further potentially wintry showers prolonged over Scotland.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, everybody knows that diamonds are forever, but take a look at this beauty. The Enigma is the largest known cut diamond in the whole wide world. How beautiful is that? It's a black diamond, obviously, weighing a staggering 555 carats, and it went under the hammer in London, not literally, for £3.2 million. Diamonds like this are very rare. They've only been found in 2 places on Earth, and scientists believe its origins may be from outer space. Let's take a look at some of the best pictures making the morning papers for you as well. The Guardian has a photo of a wallaby in Scotland as part of a story about a row over plans to chop down trees at a private island, which could result in them being culled. And he's not very happy about that, is he? And feeling bamboozled, the Express has this picture of a giant panda struggling to keep its eyes open in its snow-covered enclosure in eastern China. Wadey chose that one for us this morning. And the Telegraph has this dramatic picture of Taliban police recruits showing off their training during a graduation ceremony in Kandahar. What's he doing? What's going on there then? Don't know. And the Times has this adorable photo of a newborn bonobo ape, the first of its kind born since 2019. Hello, you. And it's at Twycross Zoo in Leicestershire. Looks a bit like me in the morning. Still to come on the programme for you, we have got all today's top stories. Of course, what on earth is happening in Ukraine? Our Prime Minister is heading to Brussels, and at 9 o'clock, Ask the Education Secretary. Don't miss it. Good morning, everybody. You are very welcome to join us wherever you're watching us around the world. This morning, our top stories. Police are set to begin contacting more than 50 people believed to have taken part in lockdown-breaking parties in Downing Street. A Russian figure skater's gold medal ceremony has been delayed following a legal investigation. Unconfirmed reports in Russian media allege that she failed a test for a banned substance. And our main story so far this morning, Boris Johnson is in Brussels for NATO talks, and the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is meeting her Russian counterpart in Moscow amid continuing fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Love that picture because they're all women. Did you notice that? Joining us now, Lord Rickets, former UK permanent representative to NATO between 2003 and 2006. Hello to you, sir. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning. What do we expect from this meeting today with the NATO Secretary-General and our Prime Minister? What could we expect?
Well, good morning, Kay. I think Boris Johnson has the easier day than Liz Truss, actually, because Britain is a firm supporter of Poland, where the Prime Minister will be going later, and has been one of the most active countries in terms of providing additional troops, additional support to NATO members near the front line with Russia. So I think there will be a strong community of view there. I think Britain has played a good role in showing other NATO member states that you need not just words, but willingness to put your troops into the areas closer to Russia. And then Poland, I think Poland and Britain will have very much similar approach to the crisis. We need both diplomacy and deterrence. Britain has been more prominent on the deterrence side of the argument, but it's good that Liz Truss is going to be in Moscow talking to Lavrov today as well. So good to see Britain at the heart of a diplomatic surge at the moment.
Yeah, do you think that Ukraine joining NATO could be part of the discussion?
Well, I think NATO has to have the right to join Ukraine like any other sovereign country. I don't believe that the West could ever accept Russia's demand that they have a veto on Ukraine joining NATO. In practice, it's not something that's going to happen while Russian troops are in the east of Ukraine. But I don't think NATO could ever bargain away their right to join NATO at some point, no.
I was speaking to another interviewee about 20 minutes or so ago and pointed out to him that the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK was on the programme actually yesterday here in the studio, and he was saying that he felt they had edged further away from war than where they were a couple of weeks ago. What do you think?
I think I would say that the cost to Putin of going ahead with an invasion of Ukraine and all the dangers that have gone up, the West is now better prepared. Ukraine has got more modern weapons. There are sanctions packages ready to go. In a way, if Putin had moved in a lightning strike 6 weeks ago, I think the West wouldn't have been so well prepared. Now it is better prepared. And there is just the sketch of the possibility of an opening on a diplomatic track, which President Macron seems to have made possible with his visit earlier in the week. We'll see whether there is anything in that. But we need both to be arguing as strongly as we can with Putin to start de-escalation. And remember, there are big exercises starting today between Russia and Belarus, which is not at all far from the Ukrainian capital, not just to de-escalate, but also that there is something in it for him in terms of a negotiation. He's got our attention now. The West is fully on this issue, and Putin needs to decide, I think, is he going to use that opportunity to try to develop some sort of long-term dialogue with Western countries about how we can all live peacefully together on this continent of ours? Or is he going to throw that away with a reckless invasion of Ukraine?
You mentioned Belarus there. I wonder if there's any significance in that, given that Belarus, along with Ukraine, decided to leave the Soviet Union some 20 years ago. Is there anything that we should read into that?
I think the whole Putin strategy here is to surround Russia with a buffer zone of states which are pro-Russian or under Russian influence, because he has this paranoid fear that NATO is somehow anti-Russian and a threat to Russia, which of course it isn't. So in Georgia, in Belarus and in Ukraine, his aim, I think, is regimes which are favorable towards Russia. At the moment, we have 30,000 Russian troops in Belarus. They're said to be holding exercises, and I think those exercises are now said to last 10 days. If at the end of those 10 days, Putin pulls back those troops and their equipment from Belarus, that would be a first important sign of de-escalation in this crisis, and very welcome. If, on the other hand, they stay there and they offer a permanent threat to Ukraine's capital, then I think the risk is growing that Putin wants to lock in the sort of deployments he's made now and produce some sort of frozen crisis around Ukraine, which still constrains Ukraine's ability to make sovereign decisions. And that's really something we all need to avoid.
Good to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us, my lord.
Thank you.
Thank you. Child cruelty offences rose by more than a fifth last year. Over 28,000 abuse and neglect crimes were recorded by police in England. and Wales, joined now by Vicky Nevin, Senior Policy Officer at the child protection charity, the NSPCC. Hi, thanks for joining us on the programme. Was this because of lockdown?
Good morning, Kay. Yes, well, lockdown has put really increased stress and pressure on families, and for children who were living in violent homes, they were perhaps locked in that home with their abuser. We've seen some really tragic child deaths: 6-year-old Arthur Lavinia Hughes, 16-month-old Star Hobson, 8-week-old Amina Johnson. And we know that in 2020 to 21, 500 children died or were seriously harmed due to abuse and neglect. And the NSPCC helpline knows that the youngest children are most vulnerable to abuse and neglect. We contacted agencies about the youngest children on average 25 times a day, and that was about children aged 5 and under, to investigate physical abuse and neglect.
So what do we need to do as neighbours? Obviously, previously it would have been teachers for kids of school age that they would pick up on whether they were quieter or whether they were suffering bruising or whatever, and alert the authorities. That didn't happen during lockdown. A lot of kids, as you say, were locked up with their abusers. But going forward, what do we need to do as next-door neighbours to keep an eye on kids?
Yeah, well, it's really important that everyone plays their role in keeping children safe. And if you're worried about a child, you can contact the NSPCC helpline. We can give you free advice and help to pass on that concern as needed. Because, it's important that there are eyes and ears in the community for children, and keeping them safe, helping to share information if there are worries.
What are we looking out for?
So signs of physical abuse might be unusual injuries, signs of neglect. A child may not be appropriately dressed. They may be looking undernourished. These kind of signs, and obviously you can also perhaps tell from a child's body language. They might disclose something to you, and it's really important that that is taken seriously and that information is passed on to the NSPCC or the relevant authorities so we can keep those young children safe.
Okay, it's good to talk to you this morning. It's just so tragic, though. I can't even begin to comprehend how somebody would want to hurt or abuse a child. Do you get a lot of calls to your helpline?
Yes, we do, and there has been this increase, and that's why we are calling on the government to take urgent action, because there is a health and care bill that's currently before Parliament, and this is the first opportunity since those tragic deaths for the government to prove that it's serious about child protection. So there's a restructure of local health systems, and health professionals play such an important role in spotting signs of abuse and neglect, particularly for children who are not yet at nursery or school and might not be seen by other people and professionals. So we need to make sure that the health profession is in a really strong position to work together with the police and local authorities. And we want to see that made clear in the health and care bill.
Yeah, we do. Thank you for highlighting that for us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
The number for the NSPCC helpline is 0808 800 5000, 0808 800 5000. Bit of a clue there as to what we are going to be doing next, the COVID restrictions, but let me just give you that number, 0808 800 5000. Still to come, the government says it's time to learn to live with COVID. But is it right to remove all remaining coronavirus restrictions in England? Latest on that to come. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Just have a quick look at these pictures. Just reached us, actually, all the way from Moscow, where the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is laying a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. She's there to take part in talks with her counterpart about the continuing situation in Ukraine. As far as our Prime Minister is concerned, he has gone to speak to the NATO Secretary General in Brussels today, moving on to Poland after that. Other news for you now, and Boris Johnson made an unexpected announcement during PMQs yesterday that he hopes to lift all remaining COVID restrictions as soon as a fortnight's time, a month earlier than previously planned. But was it a welcome surprise for everybody? Let's speak to Devi Schrader, who is a Professor of Global Public Health at Edinburgh University Medical School. Hi, thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. It was certainly a surprise. Is it a welcome surprise?
I don't think it'll be a welcome surprise to most people. I think we have lifted most restrictions. We're getting out of lockdown. We're getting normal life back. Vaccines and therapeutics and testing have enabled that. But to release isolation, I mean, isolation is about stopping someone who's infectious, passing that on to someone else. It's, I think, too early right now. We have great lateral flow tests. They identify if someone has a high viral load, if they're infectious. We have a system where if you test negative on that after day 5, day 6, you can get out of isolation. I don't know why you change that right now when we still have over 200 deaths a day to COVID.
OK. I read an interesting article that you were involved with in The Guardian where you said humans are social. We need to hug, dance, sing and recognise each other's faces and smiles. Just looking at that, I mean, so you do think that we need to get back to normal as quickly as possible, but what you're suggesting is that it's just too soon.
It is, and I think if you look at the timing, I mean, it's really clearly to create headlines today and distract from the problems that the Prime Minister is facing, which is that he seems to have broken lockdown rules, which many other people had to face accountability for and actually had consequences for, thinking of the chief medical officer in Scotland who had to resign. There are many people who broke rules and had to face the consequences. And we're now having a shifting of the dialogue towards discussing the end of the pandemic because there's a need to create a diversion instead of looking at that issue and saying the scientific evidence isn't there right now to completely release isolation for someone who's actively infectious.
So you think he's just doing it to take away from what's been happening with the lockdown parties at Downing Street and the police investigation?
Yeah, sadly, I think that's the case right now. And the good news is we are heading towards a time where we probably will not have to isolate, hopefully in a couple of months when we head into summer, when we understand more about waning immunity, the boosters, how long they last for those who are vulnerable and elderly. We know that the system we have now with vaccines and boosters, lateral flow testing, and therapeutics, antivirals in hospitals are making this a manageable disease. We've largely defanged it, taken the poison out of the bite of COVID-19, but it still can bite. And even getting Omicron after 3 vaccines can knock people out for a week, 2 weeks. This idea that, oh, we just have to pretend it's gone because we say it is a bit foolish. We should instead be saying it's a serious disease, still killing over 200 people a day. We've accepted that death toll as a society right now. What do we do to manage it better going into the future while trying to create opportunities for young people, address the cost of living, address heating issues, and kind of get back to being a functioning, healthy society?
The COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice Association are furious by the announcement. They're suggesting that well over 1,500 people a week are still dying as a result of COVID. If all the restrictions are lifted within the next 2 weeks, what's your advice to the public?
Well, I think the first thing is to do the right thing. So if you do test positive and you're unwell, stay off until your lateral flow is negative, just to make sure you don't infect others. I don't think anyone wants that kind of responsibility for what might be a mild illness for you being a serious illness for someone else. Continue wearing your masks in public spaces. Think of crowded spaces when you're in shops and public transport. You don't know who the person next to you is and what they might be facing in their lives or in their families. And just to continue to look out for each other and recognize, yes, we want to get back to all the things we wanted to do before, but to use your testing, use your vaccines, get boosted, and let's get back to a healthy society, but using those tools, not pretending COVID is just gone.
OK, good to talk to you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's have a quick look at some of these pictures, shall we? We've already brought you news about Elon Musk this morning. He has fallen out with NASA over plans to launch thousands of satellites. More bad news for him. It's given some spectacular pictures for us. Take a look. These are the skies. There you go. above Puerto Rico. And those are bits of satellites that his SpaceX company launched just last week, burning up as they fall back to Earth. They were hit by a solar storm last Friday, which effectively doomed the satellites and have brought them back into the atmosphere. SpaceX has said the falling satellites pose no danger to us back on Earth. And, oh, it's lovely actually, I really like that, gorgeous. And don't forget, at 9 o'clock, joined in the studio by the Education Secretary, Nadeem Salhawi. That is today at 9 o'clock. It should have been, as you know, on Monday of this week, but he was recovering from COVID-19. So it'd be interesting to see what he thinks about all of the restrictions being lifted in 2 weeks' time. He was, I'm sure, he used to be the vaccines minister, so I'm sure that he was triple jabbed as well. Interesting to hear his thoughts, but we'll be talking to him about education. So many of you, literally thousands of you, sending both tweets, WhatsApps, emails, where else do you, Instagrams, videos, everywhere. So we've tried to hone them down as best we can. The team has certainly, and we'll bring those to you from 9 o'clock. Coming up in the next hour, though, the Prime Minister heads to Brussels for NATO meetings as 1,000 British troops are put on standby in case of war in Ukraine. So the Prime Minister heading to Brussels. He'll then be moving on to Poland. Meantime, we've just seen images of the Foreign Secretary. She is in Moscow for talks with her counterpart, and she's been laying a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier today. Interesting to see who's got the more difficult job at the moment. I'm guessing that the Foreign Secretary will have some tough talking with her counterpart in Moscow. Prime Minister speaking to the Secretary General of NATO, as I said, and then moving on to Poland after that. And probably the headline for us back at home is that from 2 weeks' time, there will be no more COVID restrictions in England. What does that mean to you and yours? Talking about it with Labour in just a few moments. Do stay tuned.